We planted these trees a couple of weeks ago. We did a video on it, and these trees were free. Someone wanted them digging out of their garden or wanted them cutting down, so rather than charge them by the hour, as we normally would, we went along and did it for free on the basis that we got to keep the trees, and which meant that we got to dig them up intact and take the time and so on, because we weren't passing that on to the customer. It was worth doing just for the trees themselves. You know, I mean, they're pretty big, substantial espalier trees. You can see they're starting to bud out already, doing really well. And of course, with them being like 30-odd-year-old trees, we'll get a yield out of them pretty good. But in the last fortnight, these two trees between them have made us £100 with 1 hour of work. Because we're as far north as we are, by the time we get certain things come into season, like scionwood, for example, further south, the season's already over. So people further south that have got their trees starting to come to life and still looking for dormant scionwood, they're very limited, especially at the moment. You know, no one can really be importing plant matter from overseas. It's a nightmare since the whole Brexit thing happened. So at the moment, it's just, you know, all being done domestically pretty much, which means that this far north, because we're so much later than everyone else and it's just that bit colder and the season's a bit later, it means that we can charge a premium later in the season because there's no competition. By the time that this happens, you know, there is no one else doing it, so we can actually, you know, make a decent return on you know, things like scionwood. We do the same thing with a few bulbs. We've done it with, excuse me, we've done it with snowdrops previously. Exactly the same thing again. By the time everyone else has run out of stock and people are still wanting to buy them, it's past it everywhere else. They've already finished for the year, whereas here they're just starting to come up and we get to charge a premium. And we get no competition whatsoever in the market because there's no one else doing it at that time. So the reason I've done a video on this today isn't to brag, yay, we made £100, but it's just to prove that by identifying a niche with the placement of things, not just in terms of, you know, where you plant them against the field, but where the site is. So for example, if we could put something like this against the north side of a building, if we were maybe 200 miles south, and we could, you know, perhaps do quite well with the septin. It's not going to do as well fruiting wise because it hasn't got that direct southern exposure, but for scionwood it's very lucrative. And I mean, if you can make £50–100 from a tree early in the season, especially when there's not a lot of yields coming into your system, then, you know, that's probably a greater return financially than you can get off something that's going to fruit well with really nice, you know, southern exposure. And you can get, you know, how many, a couple £100 worth of apples. That's a lot of work. And it's, you know, you're not up a ladder picking apples. It's literally along the secateurs, cut them away and, you know, stick it in the post. It's as simple as that. It's a very, very fast return. It's something you can get very early on. So it's an interesting example of something that is a yield that you wouldn't necessarily have thought of. It's a yield you can get really early on if you're getting things like this, but also it's an example of just keeping an eye out. I mean, you know, these trees, as I say, they cost us nothing other than the time to go and fetch them. And in their first year, they've already paid for the fuel to go and fetch them, the time to go and fetch them, even if I was, you know, applying a reasonable return per hour on that, you know, because, you know, I don't work for free. And also has given us a nice profit beyond that as well. So these two trees in their first year have already put us well into profit before we've even got a bit of fruit off them, and it's done it all effectively for free.